It's also my role today to introduce Russell. I'm sure you probably know who he is if you haven't read it in the profile already. I've got a personal connection with Russell because he was my personal tutor and my dissertation advisor at the University of Warwick, along with Tilly Harrison, who's in the room today as well. And Russell went from being a teacher to a teacher trainer and set up, as you probably know, teachertrainingvideos.com. And I'm sure you can say more about that, but without further ado, let's hand over to Russell.
I know I gave Phil a distinction, see, that's the reason he's still quite nice to me. I'm gonna, can you hear me all right, yeah? Can you hear me all right at the back, yeah? I'm going to present something that I first presented at IATEFL almost 9-10 years ago. There's going to be many of you in the room that already know about the work I'm going to do. But I'm going to show you some new things that I'm doing with that particular work. So for those of you in the room that do already know what I'm going to talk about, you are going to see quite a lot of new things. But there's a lot of reasons why I'm going to kind of come back to this idea, which I will be showing you in a minute. One of them is because obviously a lot of the things that we do in technology these days, because it's kind of moving so fast, there's not a lot of research into those things. So a lot of things kind of get introduced and then we move on to something else, and there's never time for an idea to be researched. Whereas this particular idea that I'm going to suggest to you, or I'm going to show to you, has been really thoroughly researched. And I think one of the interesting things is that we're going to see where I started with this idea back in 2006, and where it's evolved to now. Okay, so we're talking about almost 13 years of research and looking at this particular idea. And I think a lot of the things that we've been hearing today in terms of putting the pedagogy back into the use of technology, okay, is going to be interesting, because what we're really going to see is an idea that I first come up with, which was, yeah, it had a bit of value, but actually, pedagogically, it was very weak. But where if we take that same idea and we bring the pedagogy in that we've been talking about today, we can get to quite an interesting point. And that's what I'm hoping to show you the learning process that I've gone through. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my original idea, and I want you to rip it to pieces. Okay? And then I'm going to try and defend myself and show you how my learning has evolved, and where, even with the same basic idea, I've now really moved it on, okay? So hopefully through that we're going to get a few interesting things. One thing I'm also going to say, I've got a handout for you at the end. A brilliant paper has just been recently published about this idea, and I'll give you access to it at the end. I even had to, being one of the people that first come up with this idea, I even had to contact these people and just say to them, look, my hat's off to you, sorry, this is absolutely fantastic piece of research, where they've basically gone through about 40 of the research papers into using screen capture for giving feedback to students. And so I'll make sure that you get that at the end, as well as this presentation that I'm going to give you. So, it is based on research. I've managed to publish a couple of papers myself recently, and I've actually got another one coming out this year with Palgrave, but it's not as good as that particular paper. But what I'm going to do is start with is I'm going to show you my idea. Now, I want you to go back to 2006. Just out of interest, can you put your hands up if you're familiar with screen capture technology? Alright, so it's like Gene and Snagit and Camtasia. Interesting, but actually in mainstream education it's still hardly known about. So let's just go back to 2006 a minute. In 2006, in fact it was before that, if I was going to be honest with you, it was about 3 or 4 years before that, I was at the BET conference and I saw someone use screen capture technology. I saw someone play a video that there was a recording of the screen of their computer. And at the time, that was absolutely mind-blowing. I was watching that thinking, this guy has recorded the screen of their computer. That is incredible. Now, for us today, that isn't, but at the time, that was, I didn't know what technology they'd used, I didn't know how they'd done it. But my interest had always been in feedback. And so I thought to myself, well, hang on a minute. If I can record the screen of my computer, then surely if the student sends me their work, I could open it on the screen, turn on this screen capture technology and record myself giving feedback to the student. I thought to myself, that would be a really novel way of giving feedback. We tend to give feedback we talked a lot about different ways of giving feedback today, but still traditionally, most feedback we give is, I would say it's beginning to change, but a lot of feedback is still text-based. And I was thinking to myself, that would be fantastic if I could open the student's work, mark the problems that I wanted to focus on, and then record myself and then send that video to the student. Now you've got to put that in context. Okay, that was way back in, as I said, 2002, 2003 when I had the idea, when I'd seen it at BET. I didn't know how to use the technology for a few years later. I'm going to show you that very first experiment that I did, which created an enormous amount of publicity for me. I was in the newspapers, I was on the telly, I won some awards, it got put in a government report, it really, really took off. It's terrible, okay, as you'll see, though it's got some value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and play you this example, and I'm going to show you this, and then what I want you to do is think about what is wrong with it, not what's right with it. So this was a Chinese student, okay? She sent me her work, I've opened it on the screen, I've marked the errors, I've clicked one button, and I've recorded myself giving her feedback, and then I've sent her the video. Let's see if I can just quickly play this to you.
Hi Lou, just want to go through some of the things in
I'm
your
not
recipe.
sure what I'm meant to do here.
My name is UA.
So, any German speakers around? I've got this one here, yeah? Good, thank you.
Change if you can. Here you still at the weekends. Can you look at the spelling of that word? Because you've spelled that word incorrectly. Now, if you look at this sentence, when I first come to England, now I didn't speak English. Now, this is in the past, and you've used the present simple here. So we need to change that to use the past verb. Here, you're using the wrong word. When we describe a place like London or New York, we don't use the word site. If it's a small place, we use the word town, but can you think of another word here? So you need to check that word here. And this is an interesting mistake. It is...
Okay, I'll stop that, alright? That's a pretty powerful way of delivering feedback. There's no doubt about that, okay? It's visual, you've got two aspects to it. But obviously, we could do a lot better. Now, you've been talking this morning about the types of things that we could do to look at feedback. I'm not going to mention them, I'll get you to mention them in a minute. On your table, can you just make a critique of that? First of all, what's wrong with it? And then secondly, how could you improve it? I think the delivery method is pretty powerful. Okay, in other words, I'm doing screen capture, but what's wrong is that there's no pedagogy in there. That was me. It's kind of interesting because I already had a dip in language teaching by then. I mean, I had quite a lot of experience as a teacher, and it's something I think sometimes happens with technology, that when you're focusing on the technology at the beginning, you kind of forget about the pedagogy. You're so worried about getting the technology right. You've got to remember when this was. 2006. I can promise you, when I went online to look for any research papers about screen capture, there were 3. There were just 3, and I'll tell you a little anecdote in a minute. But just in your groups, what's wrong with what I've done? How could we improve it? Just have a quick chat to people next to you. Just give you a couple of minutes.
I wasn't really getting Sorry, there was German instructions.
If we could put this a little bit further back.
Yeah. We got any bottles of water?
Can you sort it out and I'll get Russell from you?
You started 35. Yeah.
Okay. That's my singing lessons going on. Can I just sorry? Can I just, it'd be really interesting to get some feedback. You know, I don't mind, don't worry. I know it's pretty bad, okay? The idea, so I don't mind if you could, or either what's wrong with what I'm doing or how could it be improved. But I'd love to just hear some ideas that maybe you discussed. Anyone throw out an idea? John?
Yeah, we talked with Angie. And we said that there is no comments on the content really. For example, great, yes, you said that, so now, yes.
So, there are no comments on the content really. There is focus on the language only and on the mistakes. So, we would love to see comments like, oh, great, now I know more information about that. Or questions on these, or why did you go there? Why did you find out? And then focus on the grammar as well.
Okay, good, that's great. I think that's very true. All right, so it's kind of very teacher-fronted as well, yeah? We're focusing on grammar. Go on.
Okay, so we were talking about how the student got we don't get feedback from the student themselves. So looking at underlying causes of why they were making that mistake and analysing the actual mistake itself. So whether it was, like you said, was it a spelling or grammar, what type of grammar, and looking at the underlying causes of why they're doing that, why they're making that mistake. If we don't do that, then the student will know what was wrong, because you're just taking over them and saying, oh, this is a past tense, this is blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so giving more detail, more background to the mistakes itself, yeah? Okay. Again, we're still kind of quite teacher-fronted though, aren't we, in the way that we're doing that. Anyone else? Yeah. Great.
Yeah, we were saying that it would be more valuable to promote the student to correct themselves, just like you do with an old-fashioned sort of correction code. And then just at the end somebody said it's not really very interactive, so you can involve another student somehow in that correction process.
Okay, I think that's really true. So there's a whole problem here of the dialogue. We know that feedback is about a dialogue. It's about taking the teacher somewhere, isn't it? And we're not really doing that here, are we? Again, it's very teacher-fronted, it's from the teacher. So if we could build a dialogue into that, that would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? Good.
Thank you. So my colleague here, she said that, which is really true, that your level of English was really quite, it was a high standard, and that students' text production was rather low level. So we had the idea of possibly you could have your students choose, for instance, I want my feedback to be basic, advanced, or really, really super advanced before giving that kind of feedback.
It's a really good point, this balance between do you give the feedback in the L1 or the L2. If you're working in a monolingual situation, you may even feel that it was more relevant to give the feedback in the L1 rather than the L2. Funny enough, my students in this particular piece of research said to me, Russell, we like listening to it in English. It's authentic listening material. They kind of liked it. But I think the point is very true, and that is an issue. Yeah, because you're giving feedback on quite complex things, and that might not be their level. So there obviously is the potential there to give the feedback if you're working in a monolingual situation. It may be possible to give, and people have done that, given the feedback in the first language. Good, lovely point as well. Any more? As many as possible. I want you to think about what you've learned this morning and how we can apply it to this.
Maybe just giving the student a choice, so rather than just telling the student this is the correct way to do it, let them maybe get to the answer themselves by choosing.
Right.
Guidance.
That was, you're kind of right in terms of a dialogue, aren't you? Yeah. So in other words, maybe asking the students first, what would you like feedback on? Yeah. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, because I think that could be really powerful. Then you could then kind of yeah. The only thing I did right there, in a way, I personally, I didn't do very much right at all, but one of the things I did do right is that I didn't actually give them the answers. I did expect them to process the feedback I was giving them and then to act upon it. So that, I won't defend myself about much in that video, but that was the one thing that I could look back and think, yeah, that was all right. But yeah, I think that point is really interesting. Okay, so we'll come back to that as well. This thing about asking the students, where do you want your feedback? What do you want me to focus on? Okay, I think that's a really good point. Any more? I'd love some more.
How about adding some text as well? Like, just to add the point towards where students might not get the speed of the language that which you have used here. So how about combining it with the text as well?
Very true, and I've definitely made that mistake myself. You've got to remember, and I have to say, I'm doing this all the time. Okay, so I'm using this as a feedback method all the time. So this is the way I'm delivering feedback, particularly now on all the online courses I'm doing. But your point is very valid. You do end up speaking more than you do make use of the visuals. You've got to make sure you've got the balance, because this is an opportunity, isn't it? You've got the screen open, you can mark things, you can write things, you can underline them. So you really want to make sure that you've got a balance between the use of the visual and the use of the oral to really make this beneficial, because that's one of the key features that it's got. That it's kind of multimedia or multimodal in terms of the feedback delivery. But you're right, that is really important that you keep that in your mind, because often when I look back at my feedback, it's not visual enough. Yes, I've got the students work on the screen, but I'm not doing enough to make use of the visual aspect of it. So I think that's really true as well. Good, any more? I've got another comment at the back there. Thanks, Heike, for this. This is really helping me.
Thank you. Following on from the comment about making it more visual, I wonder whether kind of categorising the error types and giving them different colour codes could be nice. Like tense errors could be blue and spelling could be yellow. Because there are some errors you don't really want to focus on too much, like spelling. You don't need to talk through every single one, maybe. But tense, you might like to focus on a bit more, or grammatical errors that are grouped by different categories.
Right, I mean, that would be quite a lot of work, you know, in terms of doing it, but you could definitely do that. You could, again, it's coming back to the same point, really, of making that balance between the oral and the visual. You know, this is the key benefit of this as an idea, okay, in terms of the way you're delivering, is that it's both visual and oral. Okay, so good point. Any more, just before I'm going to move on and show you some examples? Go on.
Yeah, while you were speaking earlier, I was just thinking maybe don't show them your corrections right away or your marks right away, because you start talking about the first one and their eyes are already wandering to the third and the fourth and that maybe not listening to you. It's like having too much information on the slide or something like that, you know?
Actually, to be honest with you, that it's a really fair point, and in fact, that was one of the critiques of or the criticisms of what I did. That some of the teachers and students this was the very first piece of research, 2006, 11 Chinese students. I know nothing about research. Okay, I'm not a researcher, I'm a teacher. Okay, but one of the things that they said is that I overwhelmed them. I probably gave them too much feedback. One of the things about this idea is that you can get so carried away with it. Okay, because it is so powerful in terms of the way you're delivering the feedback. So yes, you're dead right. And we're going to watch a video in a minute. You're going to have to decide whether I improved. Okay? Right, any more points? These are really valid. Any more?
I was thinking on a really quite practical level, actioning this feedback is going to be tricky, because they'll have to pause the video, go back to their essay, make their corrections, and then go back to the video, pause, repeat. You know, I just found that practically it's a little bit difficult to action.
I think particularly when you're talking about grammar, okay? One thing I've got to tell you, because I think the point's really valid, all right? I have to clarify something. Students love it. Okay, I just want to make that point. You know, I'm going to show you some feedback from some of my students. Okay, so though there may be some practical problems, and I think I agree with that point. I think it's very valid, especially when you're doing what I was doing there, which was just really focusing on something very trivial. Yeah, if it was a general point about the organisation of the content and the way it was laid out, then I think it would have more value in terms of the use of it. So I think your point is really valid. Particularly in what I did there. I'm going to show you a later one. I did get better, all right? And hopefully the stuff that I'm doing more recently, I think is even better than that. But this one here, some of the things that mentioning. So instead of ripping me apart this time, what I'm going to ask you to do, really valid, the points were great, and it was definitely true. You know, I was very enthusiastic about what I'd done, and now I look back and think, God. But there was something in it, okay? So this idea evolves, and here I'm giving feedback to a student, but actually what I do in this particular case is I just give them 5 pieces of feedback. Now this is much higher level. This student is actually writing a piece about my work, about this screen capture idea. But I just want to show you, can we ask the question this time, think about the question this time, how is this one a bit better? All right, it's still not there, but it's getting better. Okay, and this would have been about sort of 4 years later, around 2010, 2000, something like that, okay? So I'm just going to play this one.
Provide you with a little bit of feedback on your essay. And the first thing I want to point out is we come down to here, and I was noticing that you were talking about, I think you're not describing very clearly exactly what screen capture does. And I think it's very important to explain that if you highlight anything, if you write anything, if you move your cursor on the screen, on the student's written work, then that comes out in the essay, because I don't think you're making that point very clearly here. So I think you might need to rethink that point. Another little point I just want to bring up is here, you use the word live. Now, I think live is not really the right word. I think you're going to need to explain. It's not a live recording, because obviously the student is playing it back after the teacher has made the recording. But what it is more is a conference. It's very...
Okay, so just a couple of minutes just chatting. So that was 3 or 4 years later. That was a piece of, that's an authentic piece of feedback that I was given to a student they're doing a kind of research paper. I think they were on a master's degree program. Just have a quick chat to the person next to you. Has that improved? Has that got any better? Just a couple of minutes.
I'm multitasking. I'm recording.
Okay, just because of time, I've got people already asking me questions about it. Because I want your feedback a little bit further on down the line. Obviously, what I tried to do there was actually, I only gave them, I didn't ask them what they wanted feedback on, I have to say that. You can notice I shifted over now to the content, the organisation more, the arguments underneath it all. I gave much more information, okay, in the feedback in that context. The other thing that I did was what one of the ladies suggested was that I was actually giving the feedback as I went along. I'd read the paper first. I only gave that student 5 pieces of feedback. So I looked at where I thought they were and where I thought I wanted to take them to. So it wasn't a splattergun attack on every mistake the student made. Rather, I thought really carefully about the level of the student's work, where it was and how I could improve it. But there was still no dialogue at that stage. I just want to show you a couple of things, okay, in terms of, as I did make the point, just to sort of say to you, as I said, I'm using this idea all over the place, just all different courses that I run. This is an online course that I run, because think about it in online, if any of you are delivering online. This is just some feedback from some of the students. So I've been giving online courses now with Niall since 2013, and I've surveyed the students because I give feedback using this method all the time. You know, Russell, really clever way of giving feedback, Russell. I hadn't thought of that, though I was familiar with screen capture. I like the feedback. It really helped me to see where I can improve. This one was very unique, and I could hear Russell's intonation when he was giving his feedback. It felt more personal. You know what? The voice comes up all the time in research. Voice, it keeps coming up. The feedback really adds value to the course. There's just a few on the flipped classroom courses that I run with Niall. These are some of the courses, because I run my own courses as well. And this is one from a course I run training teachers to use. These are teachers, by the way, to use Edmodo. I enjoyed the course. Your videos on Edmodo are really useful, and the feedback was really clear. Okay, that comes up. Russell, how did you do the feedback of the course? It's great. Students do really like this. Okay? I'm not saying all the time. If you did this all the time, you'd drive them crazy. You've got to choose the moment. It's got to be to do with impact. We were talking about that earlier. The impact of what you're going to do and how you can bring them forward. Okay? When I see, this is a nice one, when I see my page, my own work, and Russell gives feedback about my tasks, I am so happy. It was so cool. This is the first time that I got feedback by this way. It is very useful. Thank you for making me good, guide me well in this course. Okay? The feedback idea is game-changing. That was actually a headmaster of a really top grammar school in Devon. I did a course. The lady just asked me, Russell, do you use this with big courses? This course here, and I don't think everyone even replied to the questionnaire, and this person emailed me to tell me they wanted to be here. Okay, but that was, you know, that was part of a survey. I think I had about 70 people on that course. And, you know, how useful would you rate the video feedback you received on the scale of 1 to 10? Just how much people appreciate this way of giving feedback to them. That doesn't mean to say that it's good just because students perceive it as good. I have to say that, all right? It does include getting the pedagogy right. But there is something in this as an idea. Okay, I think it really has got some value. This is a lovely one because this is from a professor in Germany that I was working on a private lesson, and I said to her, I'm sending you some video feedback. Do you like this way of getting feedback? Let me know if you like it. If you like it, I can do it on subsequent pieces of work. This is what I got back from her. The video feedback is brilliant. I can follow everything so clearly. Please continue with this way of giving feedback. How do you do it? Okay, so definitely the pedagogy I got wrong, but the idea, there is real value in that as an idea, and that continually comes up, and you'll see that in the research papers as well. Not all of them, but a lot of research papers say that if we looked at the early research, the research is kind of divided into two parts. The kind of research that took place in the first 6 years, from about 2006 to 2012, which was kind of looking at, is this feasible? Now people are starting to dig down and say, well, why do students like it? What value has it got? I just want to point out two things from that early work. Better perception of the teacher. The students perceive this as if you really are trying. You really are trying to help them. Okay, so they perceive that you're making more of an effort by using this as a way of delivering your feedback to students. Okay? And also, an interesting thing is that a lot of people say the type of feedback they give changes. In other words, they spend less time looking at these small errors, which was obviously the big mistake that I made at the beginning, and more time looking at the organisation, the content, the general argument, the intellectual arguments that sit underneath it. As again, keeping that in mind, it might not be that this is a great way of delivering feedback all the time, but it might have certain value at certain times, okay? When I'm working with undergraduates or students on dissertations, for example, it really is powerful if I'm going through their literature research or I'm going through their intro and I can really communicate with them. Remember, for me as well, I'm working online, so we can talk about something called teacher presence. So, just a couple of things that have come up from the research then. A piece of research done by Peter Matteson, Norway. Okay, there is a reason to claim that through the use of screen capture as a medium of feedback, a closeness is desired by the students. This idea that the students feel that the teacher is making the extra effort. Audio feedback is a very useful way of giving feedback. It makes me feel as if you are beside me. This is really interesting because you're not beside them. But if you look at a lot of the research, students actually want a one-to-one. They call it conferencing. So it's like it may be an alternative. The students certainly perceive it like that. Maybe it's because of the nature of the feedback. Okay, but you're not beside them, but they kind of perceive it that way. And it's quite interesting that they say that. It's more personal. That comes up a lot in the feedback. I did like this piece of research, and this is in ELT. A lot of the early ones are in ELT. The ability to rewind and stop their teacher at will is an advantage that screencasting offers, okay? Though the research does suggest that the students do play the videos back. Now, That was some of the early research, and I started digging down. I told you, I'm not a researcher at all, as Tilly and a few others in the room will know. I'm definitely a teacher, but I tried to learn more about research and get better at doing it. And one thing that I did was, in about 2016, I decided to go back to the idea and review some papers along with someone who's got a lot more experience than me and help me. And we picked out 3 things that we think really come through. Okay, so this is trying to get in behind it. The first one is the chatty style. Students find this kind of non-threatening. When you use this form of feedback, you put a lot of modifiers in. You know, especially if you're English, you'll say that, if I was you, if you possibly could think about it, might be possible too. You know, we kind of soften the feedback a little bit. We're less direct, okay? Lots of what we call hedging, okay? So, you know, we were making the point earlier in one of the talks where someone was saying, you know, you write very good, but you don't give much feedback about it. Or you say grammar, where you say, you know, you give very little feedback. It's so direct. Here you can soften everything. You can give context to it. So I think that's one of the benefits of this as a way of giving feedback to students. This is the one that I like, and this has come out the more I've used this, okay? The inner voice. In other words, there's a lovely piece of research by Thompson and Lee, they're talking about that. And you think about it, so often you're teaching a class and you're marking someone's work, aren't you? And you're thinking, oh God, but I showed you last week about, you know, how to do the past simple, and here you are, and blah, blah, blah. And you've got this voice going on in your head, and then you say, grammar. Yeah? We all do it. I mean, I've done it, definitely. You know, we give very... So the great thing about this is that you can give that inner voice to the feedback. You can give context. You can even remind the student, don't forget last week we looked at blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you can really build context around what you're doing. And I think that inner voice, for me, is really important. And again, if anyone's teaching online, I think that's massive. I really think that that's a key factor. And then the third one, and this is particularly for teachers like myself who are now teaching completely online, is teacher presence. If you're working on an online course, especially in a lot of online courses, and I've done a few MOOCs, there's lots of third-party resources. I mean, I've done one MOOC which was absolutely brilliant, but I did another one which was on the American Civil War, and that one had a lot of stuff from third parties, and I didn't even really know who the teacher was, or who was leading the course. And then suddenly to receive feedback in this way, if you're on an online course, that's seriously powerful. It builds a relationship between you and the students. And so I continually use it on all my online courses that I do with Niall, as well as the ones that I do on my own. So I've been playing around with this idea, and I've taken it a little bit further. How long have I got left, Phil, to just show a couple of quick ideas? I've got about 5 minutes, right? Brilliant. So, a few of the challenges, what we want to do is to try to make that idea a little bit more dialogic. I'm just going to talk through a couple of these and I'll show you some videos if I get time, and then I'll carry on this afternoon in my workshop. But one thing is, for example, where I've asked the students to tell me where they want the focus. Where do you want me to give you feedback? Now, I've not done this with lower level students, this is with the higher level groups. But where I've asked them, well, where do you want me to focus? So we build a bit of a dialogue in by them. When they hand their work in, they've completed a form and said, well, Russell, can you focus on such and such? So that's one way of trying to respond to your students' needs. So they're then getting a buy-in in terms of making a decision about where you're going to focus your feedback. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do. Another thing that I've tried to do is shift over to getting the students to do the recordings. Okay? And I've done this in a few ways, particularly kind of reflection. So, for example, where I've done is where I've perhaps done a lesson, and then I might give the students a series of questions to think about and get them to reflect on the lesson and give me feedback. So I'm shifting over to getting the students to use it as a way of reflecting. And again, I'm going to talk about this again this afternoon. So I'm looking at ways of putting more of the pedagogy that we know about feedback into the actual idea itself. And another thing I've started doing is actual self-evaluation. And this is really recent. It's perhaps one of the things that I'm most pleased about. So on the teacher training courses that I do, a lot of the time the teachers have to build an e-portfolio. So all the different things they do, they put into their e-portfolio, and then I get them to reflect on it. An e-portfolio kind of has two things: the repository, where they're putting in the content, and then they should be reflecting on all the things they're doing. Okay? What I do at the end is say, right, Here's some questions to think about. I want you to evaluate your own e-portfolio. How could you improve it? What haven't you done well, etc. So again, I'm shifting the responsibility over to the students and trying in that way to make it more student-focused and more teacher-focused. And again, in this afternoon session, I'll quickly show you that. I've got a couple of examples. If I've got time left, Phil, just quickly?
Yeah.
Or am I running out of time? And I'll do
a few minutes.
Okay, so let me just jump in and see if I can quickly show you maybe just one or two examples. I have to jump out here because of the sorts of things that I'm looking at. Let's see if I can give you, let's have a quick look here. Come up a minute. Yeah, I'll show you this one, okay? But this one was actually one I was doing while at Warwick University. So Tilly in the room is going to recognise this. So this was, some of you mentioned Padlet today. Well, I even remember it was Warwisher. Okay, that's how old I am, unfortunately. Yeah. And so what I'd done was I'd done a lesson with a group of teachers, okay? And then I wanted their feedback and reflection on how the lesson had gone. So I gave them a series of questions, and I got them to use the technology and to record their reflections, give me feedback on the lesson, how they thought the lesson went. So I'm really shifting the way that I'm using the technology now. Well, what is that? That's the pedagogy. That's me bringing, I've got that tool, it's a wonderful tool. Now I'm starting to think about ways that I can make it a little bit more interesting. I'm just going to play a couple of seconds of this. So I've done a lesson using Warwisher, and I wanted some feedback from their teachers, what they thought about the lesson. I sent Celia a series of questions, and this is her replies.
Hi Russell, this is Cecilia. Today I'm going to talk about my feedback or reflection on a Warwisher activity we did last Friday. Before I answer any of your questions, I would really like to say that my Brainshark is a great tool for practicing speaking, because I genuinely believe I have been recording for this like a million times. And
that's interesting as well, yeah? Students working with technology and wanting to perfect it and doing things time and time again before they send them to you. I mean, that's music to my ears to think that she was staying up all night recording it a million times before she gave it, yeah? Okay, but obviously the real value comes in the feedback. And what happens is the questions are going to come on the screen that I sent to her and got her to kind of give me the answers. Sorry about the sound, what's going on there?
What type of language processing took place?
Okay, so this is where she starts to reflect on my lesson. Okay, so I'm using the same tool, but now the way I'm using these technologies is completely different. Why? Because I'm thinking more about the pedagogy. So it really is that value between, yes, this is a great medium, but you need the other side as well. You need to think about feedback, how we can help students to come forward and how we can get them to actually react to the feedback that they've got, okay? Right, I've been told that that's the end of the presentation. I'm just going to bring something onto the screen very quickly. What I've done is I've kind of prepared the research, if you're interested in this idea, okay? All you need to do, I've prepared a handout for you which does another quick copy of this presentation plus some of the research papers that I've mentioned. And all you need to do is get your telephones out now or do it later. Just send me an email and it will be sent to you automatically. Just russellhandout@gmail.com and you will get that handout. It's got that brilliant research paper. It's got a couple of my terrible research papers. You can see the origins of the idea, but you can also see how the idea is evolving. And I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much. Cheers, guys. Thank you.